Escape from Tarkov is notorious for its poor optimization and heavy CPU reliance, making it one of the most demanding games to run smoothly. If you've watched any of my Tarkov content before, you probably know I focused a lot on the CPU because it's the key factor in boosting FPS. But what about your GPU? While upgrading your GPU can help, there's a point where spending more stops making a difference due to the game's CPU bottlenecks and memory bandwidth demands. In today's video, I'm breaking down the FPS plateau levels at 1080, 1440, and 4K to show you exactly where more GPU power won't net you extra performance. So let's figure out the best GPU for your Tarkov setup and make sure you're not wasting your hard-earned money. Let's dive in. Alright, let me quickly break down my testing setup. I'm running a 9800X3D with a -40 CO value and a +200 boost clock override, paired with 64GB of DDR5 running at 6000 megatransfers per second with 30, 48, 48, 32 timings, and Titan tertiaries. If you want to deep dive into my tuning process, check out my 9800X3D tune video. For game settings, I'm using my optimized high texture preset, Pure 80, which I cover in detail in my Tarkov optimization guide. These settings put some load on the GPU, making them ideal for this test. I started by benchmarking on Labs, which is relatively light and gives us good baseline numbers. Then I moved to Streets of Tarkov, running a route through Klimov Street, one of the most demanding sections of the entire game. Both offline and online tests were performed to provide baseline and real-world gameplay numbers. For GPUs, I chose 3 cards, the 4090, 4070, and RX 7600. The 4090 represents the best case scenario at each resolution, while the 4070 and RX 7600 are popular value options for mid-range and entry-level builds. Once we've gone through the results, I'll share my recommendations for the best GPUs based on your build type and budget. Starting with the 1080p results, let's look at the Labs offline test. As expected, the results scale with GPU power. The 4090 leads the pack, 4070 trails slightly behind, and the RX 7600 delivers about half the FPS of the 4090. Moving to the Streets offline test, we see a similar pattern. The 4090 maintains its lead, 4070 is close behind, and the 7600 lags further behind. This is exactly what we'd expect when comparing GPUs with vastly different power levels. However, things get interesting when we take the configurations online. In real-world raids with AI players and network load, the CPU and memory bandwidth become the primary bottlenecks. Here, the gaps between the GPUs tighten significantly. The 4090 and 4070 deliver nearly identical FPS, and the 7600 closes the gap, coming within 20% of the higher-end GPUs. This highlights just how CPU-bound Tarkov becomes in online gameplay, making GPU power less of a factor. The takeaway here is pretty clear. If you're playing at 1080, you have a range of options depending on your budget. At the top end, you could go all out with the $2,000 4090 and max out your performance. However, for just a quarter of that price, the 4070 will give you nearly identical performance, and for about 12% of the cost of a 4090, the 7600 delivers around 80% of the same performance at 1080. There are also options between the 7600 and 4070 that can close the performance gap for a slightly higher cost, so you can find a card that fits your budget. For example, a 4060 Ti should offer a performance comparable to the 4070 for 1080, and while I haven't tested the Intel B580, I'd guess it would perform similarly to the 4070 at 1080 as well. Ultimately, you can choose based on how much you're willing to spend without sacrificing much in terms of FPS at 1080. Moving to 1440p, let's start with the Labs offline test. The 4090 delivers nearly identical performance to 1080, averaging around 400 FPS. The 4070 sees a drop-off, averaging around 237, while the 7600 struggles to keep up, managing just 112 FPS. On Streets offline, we start to see the effects of the CPU bottleneck already. The 4090 and 4070 produce very similar numbers, while the 7600 falls further behind, averaging just 76 FPS, highlighting that it's not well suited for 1440 native gameplay. Taking these setups into online raid reinforces this trend. The 4090 and 4070 again deliver nearly identical performance, while the 7600 shows it's not ideal for 1440 native resolution in Tarkov. With FSR, the 7600 can still deliver a nice experience in 1440, but for now, I'm focusing strictly on native resolution performance. The takeaway for 1440 Tarkov is similar to 1080. You can splurge on a top-end 4090 for $2,000, but for a quarter of the price, the 4070 or a similar GPU will deliver nearly identical performance. In the $400 to $600 range, there are plenty of great alternatives to consider, including the 7800 XT, 7900 GRE, 6800 XT, 6900 XT, 6950 XT, or the 3080 10GB or 12GB, or even the 3080 Ti. Your choice will come down to your budget, preference for newer used hardware, and what's available in your area. Even better yet, if you can wait, AMD's upcoming RX 9070, expected to launch in about a month, could be a game changer for this price bracket. Based on what we know, I believe it will become the best bang for your buck mid-range card, solidifying AMD's position in the mid-tier market. While Nvidia holds the crown at the high end, the RX 9070 to me looks poised to dominate the mid-range segment. Ultimately, you can get a full 1440 experience in Tarkov with a GPU priced around $400 to $600. I wouldn't recommend spending more than $600 on a GPU if Tarkov is your main game. Once you go beyond this range of cards, the jump up in price is pretty significant and the cost to performance ratio drops. Your money is better spent on peripherals like a higher quality monitor, keyboard, or mouse. These are upgrades that directly improve your gaming experience based on how much you spend. Or simply pocket the savings, knowing that a more powerful GPU won't give you noticeable FPS gains in Tarkov. Finally, let's look at 4K performance, where the 4090 truly flexes its power and separates itself from the other GPUs. In the lab's offline test, the 4090 hits an impressive 210 FPS, while the 4070 manages 100, and the 7600 trails behind with just 48. On the street's offline test, the 4090 holds steady, delivering nearly the same frame rate as it did in 1440. Meanwhile, the 4070 drops to 62 FPS, and the 7600 continues to struggle at 54. Taking these configurations online, 4090 continues to maintain similar performance to its 1440 results, showcasing its capability at this resolution. However, the 4070 and 7600 clearly struggle to keep up, proving they're not well suited for 4K native gameplay in Tarkov. Alright, for all you diehard 4K gamers out there, here's the takeaway. Right now, there's only one card that can handle Tarkov in 3840 by 2160 resolution with high performance, the RTX 4090. Now, that's going to change tomorrow with the release of the 5090, so stay tuned for my upcoming content on that. But for now, the 4090 stands alone as the only card that delivers top-tier Tarkov performance at native 4K. As for the 5080, I'm not fully convinced it'll be a true 4K card, but we'll see when it launches, I guess. For now, this is really for the unobtainium type crowd, the builders who spare no expense and just want the absolute possible best setup. Alright, now that we've seen the numbers and comparisons, here are my GPU recommendations for anyone building or upgrading a PC for Tarkov right now. For the 1080 enjoyers, you really shouldn't need to spend more than $300 to $350 to get solid performance at native 1080. I'd recommend looking at cards like the Intel B580, RTX 4060, or RX 7600 if you're going for new hardware. If you're open to used cards, you can get more value for your money. In that case, I'd look at an RTX 3060 Ti or an RX 6600 XT or 6650 XT. These will give you the best bang for your buck at this resolution. For 1440 native gaming, you should expect to spend around $400 to $600 for a good GPU. New options I'd recommend are the RTX 4070, 4070 Super, RX 7800 XT, or RX 7900 GRE. I personally wouldn't bother with the 4070 Ti, 4070 Ti Super, or 7900 XT, XTX for 1440. They're just not worth the extra cash. If you're looking at used cards, you can find even better value. Look at the 3080 10 gig or 12 gig, 3080 Ti, 6800 XT, 6900 XT, or 6950 XT. And if you're willing to wait about a month, the RX 9070 and 9070 XT will be released, and I think they're going to be within the same general price range. I think they're going to shake up the market a little bit and maybe even lower the prices of these cards I mentioned, or you could pay around the same amount for a newer, better performing card. For those of you dead set on 4K native gaming, there's only really one card I'd recommend that's capable, the 4090. And tomorrow that's going to change with the release of the 5090. So it's basically the 4090 and 5090. But if you don't want to go all out for a 4090 or a 5090, the cards I mentioned for 1440 do very well in 4K with upscaling through DLSS or FSR, as I've shown in several of my benchmarks on this channel. Anything between those 1440 cards I mentioned and the 4090 will be more powerful on paper, but they're not going to give you much more extra performance in Tarkov. Plus they cost a lot more, typically around $800 to $1,000, which just isn't worth it for a Tarkov build in my opinion. Either you go all out for a 4090, or I just stop at around $600 for a Tarkov GPU. Alright, that's it for this Tarkov GPU guide. Hopefully this helps you avoid overspending on a GPU and get the most out of your setup. If you found this helpful, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more Tarkov and hardware content. Let me know in the comments what GPU you're planning to get for your builds and your upgrades. I'd love to hear about your setups. If you have any questions or just want to chat about hardware, be sure to join the pyurologie Discord. We've got over 1,200 members now, and it's a fantastic, welcoming community full of knowledgeable enthusiasts. I'm always around to chat as well. My username is Puri, so feel free to shoot me a message anytime. I make sure to respond to every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.